You may have heard about professors flipping their classrooms, or perhaps you've flipped one or more of your own courses. Having spent some time in the circus where I found out I'm not naturally very acrobatic, when I first heard the term flipping, I was picturing what a teeterboard artist does, and that didn't sound like something I'm capable of. But here's the good news. Flipping and twisting on a teeterboard is hard, but flipping a class is not.
Welcome to the AAP Professor. A few minutes to focus on teaching human anatomy and physiology with host Kevin Patton.
In this episode, I discuss a new blood test to assess mild traumatic brain injuries. I talk about using a green pen instead of a red pen in grading, and I talk about flipping a classroom. You may have heard the news that the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, that is the FDA, recently permitted marketing of the first blood test to evaluate concussion or mild traumatic brain injury, MTBI, in adults. If you haven't heard it yet, your students are probably going to be asking you about it and might pay for us to be prepared for such a question, because I think it's a good question coming from a student in a variety of ways. One is it's telling us that they're really interested in this subject and they're bringing it to the classroom, and that's always to be encouraged, right? And the other thing is they're trying to fit what they're learning in A&P class with what they're hearing on the news and what they're understanding from various sources of information about their bodies and healthcare and so on. So what about this new test? Well, first of all, it's called the Banyan Brain Trauma Indicator because, well, it's a company called Banyan that's given permission to put it out. And it was looked at as part of the FDA's Breakthrough Devices Program, which is a program to promote the development and use of novel medical devices and tests and so on. So just to kind of make sure we're all on the same page here, what is a TBI or traumatic brain injury? Well, it's caused by a bump or blow or jolt to the head or a penetrating head injury that disrupts the brain's normal functioning. Its range of severity could go from mild to severe. About 75% of TBIs that occur each year are assessed as mild TBIs or MTBIs, otherwise known as concussion. Most patients with concussion symptoms, though, have a negative CT scan. That is, there are no lesions visible on a computed tomography image. Now, the potential effects of a TBI can include a variety of things, including impaired thinking or memory, impaired movement, impaired sensation, or emotional functioning. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimate that there are somewhere around 3 million TBI-related emergency department visits, hospitalizations, and deaths in the United States. And of those, TBI contributed to the deaths of nearly 50,000 people. So when we have students asking us about this test, and they probably will, because they want to know how what they're hearing on the news or understanding about how the human body works fits in with what they're learning in A&P class. They're building their conceptual framework, and of course, it would be helpful if we can facilitate that for them, right? So how do we answer them? What's going on with this test? Well, this brain trauma indicator is a blood test that's measuring the levels mainly of two proteins that are released from the brain into the blood, and it can be measured within about the first 12 hours after an injury. Now, what are these two proteins and where do they come from? Well, one of them is called UCH-L1, which is short for ubiquitin carboxy-terminal hydrolase L1. It's a protein that breaks down the precursors to the little ubiquitin monomers that have a variety of functions in the cells. In my class, I talk about ubiquitins as a little tag that gets put onto a protein, a misfolded protein that is going to allow it to be broken down by a proteasome in the cell. This UCHL1 is part of that ubiquitin pathway, the pathway for producing ubiquitins. And it's found only in neurons and, of course, in neurosecretory cells, which are, I guess, modified neurons. You could think of them as that. And so if you have neurons damaged, as you might in a TBI, then these proteins are going to be released into the blood and picked up by the blood test. It's these blood cells, these proteins are not going to be released into the blood from any other tissue because they're not really found in any other tissue. And by the way, they're found in very high amounts in neurons. They're not just trace amounts in neurons. They're found in high amounts. So that's one of the proteins. The other protein is called GFAP, which stands for glial fibrillary acidic protein. And that is one of the major proteins of the intermediate filaments that are in mature astrocytes, which we know are a type of glial cell. So again, that makes sense that if they're found in astrocytes only, that when you see them released into the blood, that means there must have been injury to the glial cells in the nerve tissue. So we have two different markers for the two different major components of brain tissue, right? Neurons and glia. So that fits really well into what students are already learning about brain tissue. So the levels of these two blood proteins after an MTBI or concussion can help predict which patients may have intracranial lesions that would be visible in a CT scan. And also, and just as importantly, it'll tell us which injuries won't have intracranial lesions visible in a CT scan. So being able to predict if patients have a low probability of intracranial lesions can help healthcare professionals in their management of these patients and help them make the decision whether to perform a CT scan or not. These blood tests, by the way, their results can be available within 3 to 4 hours. So when the FDA was looking at this, they looked at data from different centers, and they looked at a clinical study of about 2,000 individual blood samples from adults that had suspected MTBI/concussion. And they reviewed this product's performance by comparing the MTBI concussion blood tests with its CT scan results so that they could get a good correlation of what was really being shown by the brain trauma indicator blood test. And they found it was able to predict the presence of intracranial lesions on a CT scan 97.5% of the time. And just as importantly, it was able to show those who did not have intracranial lesions on its CT scan 99.6% of the time. So that means that this test can reliably predict the absence of intracranial lesions, and healthcares can use that information to incorporate this tool into their standard of care for patients to rule out the need for a CT scan in at least a third of the patients who are suspected of having an MTBI/concussion. An FDA commissioner, Scott Gottlieb, who's an MD, said that this approval by the FDA is part of the FDA's initiative to reduce unnecessary radiation exposure from medical imaging, which I didn't know was an initiative that they had, but I'm glad that they have one because that is an important, very important issue with medical imaging. We always kind of want to have the image, but we have to counterbalance that against exposure to radiation, which is not insignificant, especially when we consider its cumulative effects over the lifetime. So, according to Gottlieb, he says this is an effort to ensure that each patient is getting the right imaging exam at the right time with the right radiation dose, which is a really good idea. And I think this is great that we have a blood test that can be used along with these other medical techniques to address what is clearly an important medical issue. And I think it's great, too, that now we have another reason to tell our students that, yes, it's important to know about cells and to know about all those things inside of cells. And yes, even chemistry we need to know about. I don't know about you, but I get occasional pushback from students saying, I'm going to be a nurse. Why do I need to know about proteins in a cell? Why do I need to know about all of these organelles and so on? Well, clearly, they need the bigger picture to start to understand why they need to know it. And they need to kind of trust us that they need to know it. But in order to help them trust us, I think these kinds of examples, especially if they're the ones bringing it to us and saying, hey, what about this? These kinds of examples can really help them understand why they need to know what we're telling them they need to know about human structure and function. As always, I have some links to reference notes in the show notes for this episode, or you can go to the approfessor.org and look at the episode page. Okay, here's a really little thing, but I think it can have a big impact on the effect of our teaching on students, and that is, what color pen do you use when you're grading papers and marking comments on papers and lab reports and so on, when you're sort of sketching out things in the margin of a student's notebook to help explain an idea? If you're like me, who began teaching during the dawn of humanity, we were all issued red pens, and that's what we expect from teachers, right, is using a red pen. It stands out from whatever blue or black or whatever color pencil marks that they're making on their paper. So it's very clear who wrote what, and the comments really do pop out. The problem is that our students have, lived part of their life already, spending decades being corrected by teachers in a red pen. And some of them have had some not so good experiences. And not only that, but psychologists tell us that the color red is an alarming color. There's a reason why fire alarms and even fire trucks and so on are colored in red, because it has a certain impact on our psyche. Psychologists also tell us that the color green has a more positive impact on our psyche. It's the color of nature. It's a very peaceful color. And so it's got to be more than 10 years, maybe 20 years now, I have avoided using a red pen, and I almost entirely use a green pen. If you run into me at a HAPS conference or somewhere else sometime, tap me on the shoulder and say, hey, can I borrow your pen for a minute? And I will pull out a green pen, probably a felt tip. And that's because that's my go-to color now. It stands out from what color other people are using, especially my students. And so when I'm putting grades or comments on papers, I do it in green. And I think that it has a little bit of a positive impact, and all those little positives that we can do in our teaching, I think, add up and add to the kind of atmosphere that we want to build in our course, that is an atmosphere of support and progress, and not an alarming red kind of course. Here's a way you can help yourself and your colleagues as well. To help yourself, why not subscribe to the AAP Professor Podcast? Just go to the Apple Podcasts app or Google Play or wherever it is you get your podcasts and subscribe. And while you're thinking about it, why not share it with your colleagues? You can do that on social media. You can do that by email. Whether they're folks that you know that are new to teaching A&P or they've been doing it for a long time, but they're still interested in upping their game or maybe even contributing to the A&P Professor Podcast. I sure do appreciate your help with this. Flipped learning or flipped classroom. What in the world is that? By now we know that it's not the same as doing a flip or a twist on the teeter-board or in Olympic gymnastics. Let's all get on the same page with what we mean by flipped learning in the classroom. So flipped learning in this context is most often described as a type of blended learning strategy. It reverses what some call the traditional classroom strategy of presenting content in a lecture in class and then assigning homework activities outside of class. In the so-called flipped approach, it's reversed. It's turned on its head. Students get reading assignments and online presentations or online activities first, and then they come to class, and there, instead of the usual lecture, they do any of a variety of active and interactive learning activities. So a lot of folks trace this back to 1993 when Allison King wrote a very widely read journal article called From Sage to the Stage to Guide on the Side. And I'm sure you've heard those terms, sage on the stage, which is considered old-fashioned nowadays, and guide on the side, which is considered an ideal by a lot of people. And then not too long after that, in 1997, Eric Mazur at Harvard developed something he called peer instruction, where students did a lot of learning activity prior to their classroom activity. They came into the classroom, got together with their peers, and really wrestled with some very deep learning activities. The term flipped learning, though, didn't come until 2007, when two folks, John Bergman and Aaron Sams, proposed the idea. And they give credit for their approach to the method to a group of people, Maureen Lage, Glenn Platt, Michael Triglia, and their idea of an inverted classroom, or the process of inverting the classroom by having online video presentations before the class, and then you get to class and do some work with those ideas rather than having the usual initial presentation of ideas in a traditional lecture. Now, in my mind, this whole approach is what we old-timers used to call lab class. You know, in lab where you study your material and then you come to lab ready to dissect or to measure heart rates or whatever other fun activity was planned for that session. But of course, you know, that was lab. There was this other big nasty beast called the lecture class. And that's what we're focusing on, flipping the lecture class, or what you could think of is turning your lecture class into a lab class, sort of. I've been doing this for quite a while. Honestly, I wasn't aware of this method's growing use in the so-called lecture classes until about 2005, when I started thinking about how to put more of my in-class lectures outside the classroom and use that time inside the classroom to help students tackle the problem solving, the hand-wringing, application of ideas, and construction of a useful big picture of human structure and function. So how do I do that? And I looked around at a variety of ways. I think some of the initial people in this movement, including Bergman and Sams and others, they start using PowerPoints that were narrated. I mean, that's for a long time, that has been a built-in functionality of PowerPoint. And I actually tried that, but I found that the files that you end up with are huge. And back then, my students, a few of them had a hard time even getting to internet service. They would have to come to campus outside of their normal class times and do it on campus or go to their local library or something like that. And even then, it took forever to download the files. And we know how patient our students are sometimes, especially when they're anticipating some required activity. They don't want to wait for things to download. And there were some other issues I had with it in terms of being able to go back and edit things as I update my course and so on. So I eventually found some software that has since been retired. And what I use now is a similar software that I think works much, much better, and it's always improving. It's called iSpring, and I'll have a link to that in my show notes and on the episode page at theapprofessor.org. And I actually have a seminar that you can view online, a webinar type thing that you can view online at the AAPprofessor.org. And I'll have a link to that in the show notes and episode page as well, where I kind of walk through how I use iSpring to do some pre-lectures before the lecture class. So I started doing that in the fall of 2006, and I never stopped. As long as I was doing an on-ground class that included a lecture course, then it wasn't really a true traditional lecture course. It was a blended lecture course, a so-called flip lecture course. Although I did continue to do some traditional lecturing within class, so I guess to a purist, you would call that a half flip, with my own little twist on it. So it's a half flip with a twist. Yeah, okay, so here we are back to the teeter board and circus acrobatic analogies here. Let's get away from that and get back into the classroom here. What I did, I called previews. I called them lecture previews because they were going to lecture class. I mean, that's the terminology they knew, right? So they were required to watch online previews in their learning management system. And so I would post it in the learning management system, and I would try to get them as short as I could. Maybe 10, 15 minutes. Some of them were as long as 45 minutes, but I later broke those down into shorter units because that is just too intimidating for a student. Just like I like to keep these podcast episodes to around a half hour, 20 minutes to a half hour. I listen to some podcasts that go for an hour and a half, and honestly, sometimes those just get a little bit too long for straight listening. Now, if I was doing some backflips in the middle, then maybe not. So I often just break them down myself and stop listening and start again. And students can do that with a longer preview, but I decided to help them along and do it for them. So I would have multiple short online presentations. And these were based on a PowerPoint presentation, but I use this plugin, as I mentioned, called iSpring. And what that does, it allows me to put a little video of myself, my little talking head in the corner. It allows me to show the slide, including any animations that I have. And what I mean by animations is an arrow coming in from the side, or different points being revealed one by one on the same slide, or maybe a little ball traveling through the cardiovascular system or through the nephron of the urinary system or something like that. And not only that, but on the side, there is an outline of all the slides arranged in groups and logical groups with headings. So students could go back to a slide and say, well, wait a minute, I missed something, or I was vegging out during that time. So I can just flip back and go to this other slide and start over again. Another advantage is that they can click another tab, and on the side, that outline of slides is replaced by notes. And in those notes, I put a transcript of what my narration is, because, we need to have universal design. I mean, the law is that we need to be prepared for common issues that students have, including hearing impairments. And so if I'm requiring them to listen to something online, then I better have closed captioning or transcript. And so I have the transcript for each slide, each individual slide alongside that slide. And it's far easier to do that when you're making it than have a hearing impaired student have to suddenly go back and fill that all in. And I say that from the heartache of having to do that, because I really wanted that student that I got that was hearing impaired to have a great experience, and she could not have a great experience if things weren't ready for her. So I worked really fast to do that. And nowadays, there's pretty inexpensive transcribing services where I don't have to do it myself, and for not very high price. And maybe you can talk your department or college into footing that bill at the beginning so they don't have a massive bill in an emergency when they have a student that absolutely requires that. And it not only helps students with hearing impairments, I find that ordinary students with normal hearing, they benefit from sort of reading alongside sometimes too. Another neat thing about this system that I use, iSpring, is that you can build in little quiz questions so that you can, go through a few slides, quiz them, then they can go back and, redo those slides if they find that they didn't get the main points. And not only that, and I haven't done this yet, but with iSpring and similar programs, you can link those questions to the learning management system. So any results that they get there to that little quiz you give them every once in a while, embedded within that preview lecture, that will automatically feed back into the learning management system, and that can become part of the grade. Now, if I ever do that, I don't think I'm going to make it part of the grade. I'll probably post it so they can see how they're doing, and so I can see how they're doing and see if there's any trouble spots that I'm not otherwise picking up with other ways of assessing where those trouble spots are. But I don't really want it to be a high-pressure thing. I want them to go ahead and guess, and if they get it wrong, go back to the slide and get it right. I don't want this to be a high-tension thing for them. There are other high-tension things I give them later on in the process. Another thing I do with this, by the way, is in the learning management system where they are watching these presentations, these online presentations, they have to watch them. And if they don't watch them, then I can set the learning management system so that it will not open up their other activities. So they won't be able to take the online tests that they have to take. They won't be able to get to the notes, the outline that they need to get to. They won't be able to get to anything else they need to do the learning they need to do in the rest of the course. So that in itself is a motivation. But it's not only a motivation, built within the little settings of my learning management system. It's also a motivation to come to class prepared, because when they get to class, they know that when we get to a new topic, the first thing that I'm going to do is get out the clickers. And of course, there's many different ways of doing student response systems. I use clickers, and I'll talk more about that in a future episode of this podcast. But that's what I use. And so I'll give them a clicker question, and then we can see at a glance when the results show up in the graph from the clicker system, who's been doing the previews and who hasn't. And I can have a nice little talk with people and get them on board. And honestly, it only takes a few times of students lagging behind with their preview lectures, their online lectures outside of class, before they get the idea that they're not going to understand anything that's going on in the class if they haven't done that ahead of time. Not only with the clicker questions, but with the other activities I do. In the episode that I released just before this one, I talked a lot about concept maps and how you can use that as a learning activity within the classroom. And so that would be an example of taking material that they were studying in the online previews before class, come to class and say, okay, make a concept map. Get into groups, work with peers. There's that peer instruction thing. Work with your peers and build a concept map based on what you learned in the preview or what you think might be going on in this other concept that we're about to get to. So it's kind of a different kind of preview of upcoming material. So there's all kinds of things that you can do in the classroom. You can have students working on case studies. You can bring in some lab activities that work well in a classroom setting. You can do all kinds of things in the classroom. And what I do is still a lot of traditional lecturing. I try to break it up with discussions, with concept maps, with case studies, done in small groups and things like that. So hence the half flip thing, but you don't have to fully flip your class. As a matter of fact, if it's a really scary idea to you to do flipping, and I've known a lot of people that have completely flipped their classes completely backwards, like I first described, and they're still alive to tell about it and actually walking around with smiles on their faces because they really like how it has affected the learning in their classroom. So I'm not trying to dissuade you from doing that, but what I'm telling you is there is another option. There's an in-between option where you don't have to give up all of your lecturing that you're so comfortable with and used to. Just give up some of it. And it's an easy thing to do, especially nowadays with the kind of technology we have. And look at my online preview and you'll get a taste of it. And if you want some help or need to ask some questions, go ahead and call in. And some of the questions will probably be useful for other people to hear. So I'll handle them maybe in a future episode. So please do call in. Or if you would just want to chat with me one-on-one, feel free to do that too.
The A&P Professor is hosted by Kevin Patton, professor, blogger, and textbook author in human anatomy and physiology. Go online for information, transcripts, and links related to topics in this podcast at theapprofessor.org.